Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us for our Chats on the Past program, where the museum discusses history with scholars, authors, historians, and artisans. Today, our program is being held in connection with our newest exhibition. It's called Playful Pastimes, exploring leisure activities in our region between 1890 and 1910. As always, my name is Nicole Carpenter. I am the assistant director here at the Westport Museum for History and Culture. As always, we are very pleased to offer this program for free for all of our members, and we do appreciate any support that you can give, however much you are able to give, because as always, we are not funded by the town, state, or federally, just through grants. So your support is always appreciated. Coming up very soon at the museum, just a couple of events. On August 17th, we continue our walking tour series. It's our Destination Westport series. And that day we will be doing our In Gatsby's Shoes tour down at Longshore. On September 19th, we will be doing a short film preview for the film Dragon from Chicago, all about Sigrid Schultz, the World War II reporter and a little bit of a spy. So definitely tune in for that. That will be live at the museum. And on September 27th, we have the Westport is Your Oyster event, a fundraiser, kind of kickoff to Fall Bash, celebrating this Westport kind of seafood. All of these events are coming up this fall, along with many, many others. So we do encourage you to go online to westporthistory.org and check our calendar for all of those events and more. If you have any comments or questions during our program, please enter them in the chat box. We will be going through them at the end of our presentation, but please do enter them anytime and we will go through them at the end today. So I am very pleased to welcome Mr. Tim Manners, writer, communications consultant, and baseball fan. Magna cum laude graduate of Tufts University with a BA in history. Manners is a former FM radio disc presenter, publicist, and magazine publisher. Currently an essay specialist with Westport-based Manor Group. He is also the author of Relevance, Making Stuff That Matters, published in 2008 by Penguin Portfolio. After casually asking his friend Chris Hoyt in 2020 why his father had never written a memoir, Manners found 8 boxes of Yankees legend Waite Hoyt's papers sitting on his front porch. And 4 years later, University of Nebraska Press published Schoolboy, The Untold Journey of a Yankees Hero. So without any further ado, let me welcome Mr. Tim Manners. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Nicole. It's an honor to be here.
Of course, we are very pleased. So without any further ado, I am going to turn it over to you, Tim, to lead us through all of this content about this fascinating Yankees hero.
Great. Well, excited to share the story of Waite Hoyt, Schoolboy Hoyt, with you all this afternoon. So let me start here. Oh, there we go. I can use
there
this.
We are.
Okay, so you all recognize this handsome fellow. That's Babe Ruth. I don't think there's anybody more famous in American folklore history than the Babe, the Bambino, the Sultan of Swat. And this guy, this handsome fellow, Lou Gehrig, very recognizable, remembered not only because of his great prowess on the baseball field, but of course the tragic story of how he contracted ALS and so forth. Now, if I were to show you this picture or to show it to any random group of people, probably wouldn't be able to name this gentleman. You may be guessing just because we're here to talk about him. But that's Waite Hoyt. Even Yankees fans, I don't think, would recognize that picture and that name, which is really unfortunate because Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Waite Hoyt is the pitcher on that great 1927 New York Yankees team, really set the template for the future of baseball that holds to this day. It really was proof of concept of power hitting, power pitching, of what makes a great baseball team. To the extent that Waite is remembered, it's more like this, which may surprise you. In Cincinnati, after his baseball career was over, Waite became the voice of the Cincinnati Reds, the beloved voice of the Cincinnati Reds. He was a really special guy. He was known for his storytelling. and his storytelling in particular during rain delays. In fact, the legend is, and it's probably more truth than legend, that he had more listeners during the rain delays than he did when the team was actually playing. I'm just going to give you a little sample, hopefully this will work, of how he sounded on the air so you can get a sense of why he is still, to this day, well remembered in Cincinnati, even though he's largely forgotten as a member of the 1927 New York Yankees.
The fellow said to me, last year it was, he said, wonder what they will say 300 years from now. I said, what do you mean? He said, how will they describe baseball then? They'll be talking about the game that used to be. I said, what do you mean the game that used to be? Well, he says it wasn't in existence 300 years ago, and there's no reason to believe that it will be in existence 300 years from now. Well, that's a little far-fetched, and that's perverse thinking in a way, but it could be. Maybe some of these games like baseball and football will be replaced by others, but this has been a grand game, and it served a lot of purposes, a lot of people, a lot of youth, and a lot of oldsters. And it's a game to be thought of in they say, national pastime, and occasionally people in other sports question whether this is the national pastime. And with no effort to deprecate any other sport in the world, because they're all fine sports, and I'm really a sports lover of all types. Love football, basketball, hockey, and it may be that the fellow gets a little too old to take them all in, but on the other hand, they're all great. But this has been a game that has seen very little change in some respects, and through the years has done a lot for a lot of people, both on the field and spectators. All right, they're putting Donner out on first base, and we go on with the game.
So as you can appreciate, that sort of easy transition from telling a story or offering some insight right back into the action was really a big part of what made Waite Hoyt so special as a radio announcer. But let's kind of go back to the beginning here. You're not going to recognize any of the people in this picture, maybe not even me. That's me on the right. I've changed a little bit. This picture was taken about 6 years ago. That's my wife, Beth. On the left there, she hasn't changed a bit. And in the center is my dear friend, Christopher Waite Hoyt, whom I've known for about 40 years. I was in the public relations business. Chris was my client. And I knew Chris for probably a year or two before he even mentioned who his famous father was. And I remember the moment very distinctly. We were in a car. We were coming back from a meeting at Ogilvy and Mather, the big ad agency where Chris was working at the time. And I think he was just bored. And he kind of gave me a sideways glance and he said, my father was a Hall of Fame pitcher for the 1927 New York Yankees. And that got my attention. So I sat up straight and I said, what was his name? And he said, Waite Hoyt. And I'm like, who? What? When? Where? Why? Waite Hoyt? I was truly embarrassed. I had no idea who Waite Hoyt was at that time. Of course, I went home, I got on my computer, I Googled Waite Hoyt, and I was just astonished by the life that he led and all the things that he had done and the contribution that he had made to baseball. And it really just astonished me that nobody, myself included, really much remembered who Waite Hoyt was. And so the subject of Waite, Chris's dad, would come up from time to time over the ensuing years. And Chris would mention that he was unhappy that his dad had never finished a memoir. He had made something like 5 attempts at writing a memoir, but never finished one. About 4 years ago, just before the pandemic hit, I was out in Arizona and I was having dinner with Chris, and the subject came up yet again. And Chris just looked at me and said, you know, Tim, I have 8 boxes of my dad's materials, his letters and so forth, and I am sending them to you. This was not a question. The next thing I knew, there were 8 boxes of Waite Hoyt's letters and so forth, his files, sitting on my doorstep. My first thought, of course, was, what if there's nothing in here? What am I going to tell Chris? But it turned out to be a real treasure trove of material, and I was able to put together Waite Hoyt's life story entirely in his own words. So this is a true memoir, which makes this project unusual. Initially looking at it, I thought more likely it would be a biography, but amongst his materials was a big, thick 3-ring binder with hundreds of pages of interview transcripts. And when I saw that, I realized that there was really a rare opportunity, a real gift to us to be able to put together his story truly in his in his own words. So where does that story begin? Well, it began at Ebbets Field in Brooklyn, which is really, when you think about it, the Mesopotamia of modern day baseball. That's where Waite grew up. You may have caught a little bit of the Brooklyn accent in that radio clip that I just played. But Waite was 7 or 8 when Ebbets Field was built. He liked to say he watched it being built brick by brick. He lived also not that far from the Polo Grounds, home of the New York Giants. So there were baseball people, baseball players, managers, just sort of hangers-on, whatever, in and around his neighborhood in Brooklyn. Not the least of whom was his dad, Addison Hoyt. That's Addison Hoyt, Waite's father, on the left. Waite there in the lower right is kind of young man. I'd place him about maybe 17 or 18 in that picture. Addison Hoyt was a baseball nut. He was a vaudeville actor. Waite kind of followed in both footsteps. Actually, he most assuredly followed in both footsteps later on in life. But Addison Hoyt wanted nothing more than for his son to become a baseball star, and began working with him very early on with his throwing and catching, not so much hitting, but throwing and catching. And Waite was a natural. So on the other end of this telescope was his mom, Louise, or Lucia, as she called herself. She was quite the opposite of Addison. She was an intellectual. She was a writer. Addison was an intellectual too. They both really enjoyed the arts and literature and so forth. But she was all about respectability. She was kind of a Victorian. Everything had to be just so. And she wanted nothing more for her son than to go to college and get a job and become a respectable member of society. Now that's young Waite there sitting in her lap, looking like a firecracker about to go off. And you can just tell by the glint in his eye which direction he was likely to take. And this really goes to kind of perhaps the central conflict of the Waite-Hoyt story. And every story has to have at least one conflict in it. And Waite's story is really a suitcase full of them. But it was whether to follow this path that his father wanted for him as the baseball player, or a more respectable path there on the other side of truly a schoolboy and becoming a professional and, making a contribution to society in a more, let's say, honorable way. So you have to keep in mind the sort of the context of the times. Baseball at that time was not anywhere near respectable as a vocation. For Waite to choose it was almost the equivalent of running off to join the circus. So there was this ongoing conflict of whether he should have, followed in his father's footsteps, which of course he did, but he was always looking over his shoulder and almost haunted by his mother's admonition that he really needed to do something more significant, more important, more respectable than just becoming the greatest pitcher of the greatest baseball team of all time. So he chose this path of becoming a baseball player, and that's young Waite. He became a local star, high school baseball team. Erasmus Hall is a very famous high school in New York City, in Brooklyn. And he also was playing for what were known as the newspaper leagues at the time. And so he came to the attention of some of these baseball folks who were in the area, including this fellow, rather intense looking guy. His name is Red Doohan. You can see he's got red hair a little bit, you can see there in the corner. Red Doohan was the catcher for the New York Giants. He saw Waite pitching and recommended him to John McGraw, the manager of the New York Giants. Said, we should have this kid come in. You should give him a look over, and maybe he can pitch batting practice. And so that's what happened. Waite became one of the pitchers who pitched batting practice for the New York Giants. Now, keep in mind, this is quite an honor, quite exciting, and so forth. But these were men twice his age, and it was a rough and tumble era of baseball. And these were not the nicest people in the world, these players. They were really tough on Waite, up to the point where they would threaten him with violence if he didn't pitch the way that they wanted him to. They just were not nice at all. Now, in this picture, in the center there, you may recognize Christy Mathewson, who is legendary. He was one of the first baseball players inducted into the Hall of Fame. He was Waite's idol, and he was a nice guy. I'm sure that he was very nice to Waite, even while these others were most definitely not treating him very well. You may not recognize this face either. that's Casey Stengel, very young Casey Stengel. He was on the Giants team at that time, and he was one of the few who treated Waite with some respect, although at first he refused to take batting practice with Waite. He saw this 15-year-old kid and was just afraid that he was going to get hit, that the kid wouldn't be able to get the ball over the plate. But he watched him pitch for a little while and ultimately said to Waite, "Hey, you're pretty good, kid. Nice going." And he was happy to take batting practice with him. Now, this went on for about, I don't know, maybe a couple, 4 weeks or so, about a month or so. And so Waite was taking a trolley to and from Polo Grounds. I said before earlier that it was close by. It really wasn't. It was like an hour each way and back. It was rather grueling. As I said, Waite was not really having fun exactly with the Giants team. And so he went to John McGraw, the legendary manager of the New York Giants. And you can tell just by looking at him, if you didn't know already, that he was not the most approachable character in the world. He was rather intimidating, but Waite said to him, "Mr. McGraw, I really appreciate this opportunity, but I can't do this anymore. I need to be playing with boys my own age, so sorry, I'm out." And McGraw looked at him and said, "Son, be here Monday morning with your dad. I'm going to offer you a contract," which is what happened. Now, it wasn't exactly a contract per se. It was really an option. And all it said was that if Waite decided he wanted to become a professional ball player, that his services belonged to the New York Giants. It was a $5 bonus, which Waite's dad, Addison, immediately relieved him of, bought himself a hat, and Waite said that he could have killed him. He wasn't very happy about that turn of events. But anyway, so he was signed to the New York Giants, age 15, hence the nickname Schoolboy. Now, he didn't become a member of the Giants team right away. He had to go into the minors. There's an early baseball card where you can sort of get a sense and proving that his nickname was in fact Schoolboy. Some people challenge me on that. His nickname Schoolboy is actually on his plaque at the Baseball Hall of Fame. A lot of people, when they think of Schoolboy, they think of Schoolboy Rowe, but there actually were about 3 baseball players who used the nickname Schoolboy. There were about 14 who used the nickname Babe. So these names tend to be repurposed. And those 14 players, that doesn't include Shohei Ohtani. It's a little joke there. But he was the toast of the town. He was on the cover of magazines. It was really national news. The World Magazine is long defunct, but this was kind of like the equivalent of being on the cover of the New York Times magazine. And the caption on this, which I couldn't get the whole thing into the frame, was the luckiest boy in America. And there were comparisons of Waite to young Christy Mathewson, his idol. And so he really appeared to be on his way, but not so fast, because he wasn't ready for the big leagues. Is still the case to this day, that when you get drafted into the majors, you spend some time in the minor leagues. And for Waite, that was purely, truly a primitive experience. This is just one example of the kind of baseball field where he was playing. And if you look at it, you can see that the outfield slopes up to the right. That's not exactly regulation. And Sulphur Dell was so dusty that it used to be sprayed down with oil. And by the time the game was over, everybody was covered with it. Was under their fingernails. It was really a mess. So it was hardly glamorous. And you to keep in mind, once again, here he was now 16 by the time he went to the minors, playing with men twice his age in very rough and tumble places, not only like Sulphur Dell, but also Lebanon, Pennsylvania, where the shower was a bucket with holes punched in it. And the players, Waite included, would have to clear the field of rocks before they could play. They were responsible for grooming the fields. And if the spectators didn't like the way the game was going, they might start throwing the rocks at the players. This actually happened, not to Waite, but there was an incident where Stan Kovaleski's brother, I can't remember his first name right at the moment, but he was rounding third about to score, and somebody hit him on the jaw with a rock and just knocked him out. But there were all kinds of untoward experiences. It wasn't just that he was playing with these older men and so forth, but it was everything that came with that: the drinking, the gambling, the houses of ill repute. And it was just everything that his mother did not want for him, he was experiencing in the minor leagues. Here's an example, just kind of one of the players that he might have played with, Charlie Schmidt. In fact, he did play with him. He would wrestle bears at home plate. It was that kind of thing. He saw a mafia hit outside his bedroom window one morning. He witnessed a tar and feathering and a lynching. I mean, it was just really bad stuff. And the thing about it was that he wasn't getting better as a pitcher. He was losing far more games than he was winning. This is a picture of Waite. That's Waite on the left with one of his best friends, Gus Helfrich, on the right. They're so similar in appearance, they could almost be brothers. But it was 3 years really of very difficult circumstances for Waite. John McGraw kept sending him down time and again. Waite played for 7, 8, 9, 10 different minor league teams. He just kept getting shipped around from one place to another. The players weren't very good. The managers were even worse. And by the end of the 3 years, which was kind of the statute of limitations, if you will, on the ability of a major league team to keep someone in the minors, Waite decided that he was going to quit baseball. He didn't exactly announce it, but he had sort of made his mind up that his mom was right, that he needed to get out of this business. He didn't get very far with that idea, though, because he was quickly contacted by these gentlemen from what were known at the time as the industrial leagues, which was something that I didn't know anything about. I had never heard of this, but back in those days, in the 19-teens, there were baseball teams that were sponsored by various kinds of manufacturing companies. So a tire manufacturer or a shipbuilding company would put together baseball teams, and they would recruit people like Waite. They didn't actually have to make tires or build ships, but they would play on the baseball team. They were pretty good teams. They were semi-pro teams. So Waite went to Baltimore, Maryland, and joined a team. It was a shipbuilding company. The team was called the Baltimore Dry Docks. And he really, at this point, came into his own. He was a little bit older, and he was now playing with better pitchers and better players. He had become a better pitcher because he was playing with better players and managers and so forth, as I said. And he quickly came to the attention of the gentleman on the left, Ed Barrow, who at the time was the general manager of the Boston Red Sox. And he called Waite up to Boston and offered him a contract. This time it was for reasonable pay. And Waite, being Waite, actually, tough negotiator, said, I'm very interested, I'm honored, thank you very much, but if I'm going to take this contract, you need to allow me to pitch within 4 days of reporting to the team, which really took Ed Barrow aback. But he finally said, I like your spirit, kid, and you're on. And so that's what happened. Waite joined the Red Sox, and at the time, actually, Babe Ruth was still on the Red Sox. He was being transitioned out of the pitching rotation into the outfield so that he could hit every day. Waite was brought in essentially to replace Babe Ruth in the pitching rotation, which is kind of a little-known factoid that's kind of interesting. His first game was against the Detroit Tigers and the notorious Ty Cobb. You could probably identify him even from the back, just from the way that he's sliding into home plate there, spikes up, as legend has it. So he was pitching to the Tigers, and Ty Cobb comes to bat, and always wanting to intimidate the new kid. Cobb proceeds to turn his back on Waite and to keep him standing there, keep Waite waiting. And then finally turns around, assumes the batting position. So Waite returns the favor, turns his back on Ty Cobb. Finally pitches his first pitch to Cobb. Cobb misses it by a foot. The crowd cheers. Waite settles in. He wins that game. However, the Detroit team, for some reason, was very upset with how the game had gone, and there was a brawl, which, of course, by many accounts, is very true to form for Ty Cobb. But he had a good season with the Boston Red Sox, and this is a picture from 1918. So it was actually the year before Waite joined the Sox. I couldn't find a picture from 1919. You might notice a very skinny Babe Ruth there, third from the left. But he had a successful season. His second season, he hardly played. He injured himself in some locker room horseplay where there was this light that was hanging from the ceiling, and the players were taking turns trying to kick the light. And Waite suffered a groin injury, ended up in the hospital. He also suffered from some blood poisoning, which was a condition that seemed to plague him for much of his life. But he managed to recover from that, went home, and this is kind of quaint when you think about it. He started to work out with his dad. They would go out into a park in Brooklyn in the middle of the winter, and Waite's dad, Addison, would just pitch to him until his arm regained strength. And the other part of this story was that Addison, unbeknownst to Waite, was reporting back to Ed Barrow, who had now joined the Yankees. So you may know this, that Ed Barrow was the general manager of the Red Sox with Babe Ruth. He went over to the Yankees. He engineered the big purchase of Babe Ruth. And then about a year later, engineered a huge trade between the Yankees and the Red Sox, which resulted in Waite joining the Yankees. So Waite was actually on the Yankees, a teammate of Babe Ruth's twice, first on the Red Sox, then with the Yankees. Here they are together, and you may sense that there isn't a lot of warmth there, that maybe they don't like each other very much, which may be surprising if you know anything about Waite Hoyt. He's often referred to as Babe Ruth's roommate or his best friend. Now, he was never Babe Ruth's roommate. That's kind of an urban legend that got started somehow. Whether Babe Ruth had any best friends is another story. But the interesting thing about this relationship with Babe Ruth is that they didn't speak to each other while they were on the Yankees for 2 years. And this really came from Babe, not from Waite. Waite professes that he has no idea why Ruth became so angry with him. Now, they were both dating the same showgirl at the time, which may have had a little something to do with it. But the story was that Waite was pitching an afternoon game at Yankee Stadium, and Babe Ruth let a routine fly ball just drop. And Waite turns around, his hands on his hips, and he's glaring at Babe. They get back into the dugout, and they're exchanging words, and then it continues in the locker room, and the fists began to fly. And this was actually one of the first stories that Chris Hoyt, my friend, told me about his dad. My father got into a fist fight with Babe Ruth. I mean, how cool is that? Can you imagine such a thing happening? Whether any real punches landed, probably not, but they didn't talk for 2 years. The feud continued. And Babe was known for feuding with people, as you may be aware. He didn't talk to Lou Gehrig for a long time. He didn't talk to Ty Cobb for a very long time, maybe understandably. But in any case, the feud ended ultimately just almost as abruptly as it started. They were coming back from St. Louis from an away game on a train, and Babe would sometimes buy ribs and beer, and I think he would sell them to the different players. And Waite was walking by, and the Babe offered him a beer and said, "Forget about it, kid, we're good." And so they did, they patched it up, and they did become close friends over time. As I said, Waite has this sort of reputation as being very close to Babe Ruth, and he certainly was. In fact, he was one of the very last people to see Babe Ruth alive before he passed in 1948, visited him in his apartment in New York City, and then he was a pallbearer at his funeral. Most famously, when Waite became an announcer for the Cincinnati Reds, he gave a eulogy for Waite. The word came in over the teletype during a game that Babe had passed, and Waite said, "Just hang around, everybody, after the game is over, and we'll talk about the Babe." And he held forth for at least an hour, just extemporaneously telling stories about Babe Ruth. You can find a recording of that online, and if that kind of thing interests you, or even if it doesn't, it's definitely worth checking out. So the other big relationship, it was, I think, somewhat remarkable, was that with Lou Gehrig. Now, Gehrig, when he joined the Yankees, was much younger. Well, he was somewhat younger than most of the other teammates, but he struck almost everybody as being, let's say, immature. He was known to be a mama's boy. While all the guys would go out drinking, he would go to Sheep's Head Bay and catch eels, and then he would give the eels to his mom, who would pickle them or fry them up, and then Lou would bring the eels to the clubhouse and expect everybody to eat them. Nobody wanted to eat them. Miller Huggins made everybody eat them, said, don't hurt the kids' feelings. But there were just episodes in the book, little stories where Waite talks about Lou's behavior in ways that suggest that his presence sometimes could be annoying because he was a cheerleader, or he would do things like he might cry if he had felt he had left the team down, which, most of those hard-bitten Yankee players didn't take well to that. They also maybe didn't like that Lou Gehrig was this Ivy League guy. Now, Waite ultimately connected with him on that level, but while they were on the Yankees together, they never really truly got along. It wasn't until much later, till after Waite was off the team, that he and Lou Gehrig connected, and it was just purely by happenstance. They both liked to skate as a way to get into condition, and they both happened to go skating at the ice rink at Rye Playland, and just happened to be there at the same time. And now, being older, they really connected for the first time as adults, and really enjoyed talking to each other about philosophy, the meaning in life. I don't have any details on exactly what they talked about, but I know that during this period, Waite really felt that he came to a new understanding of Lou Gehrig and a new appreciation of him, and saw in Lou almost the inverse of himself. Rather, another way of putting that is he saw in Lou the person that he would have liked to have been, not as a baseball player, but as a human being. And he just saw certain traits, like his sense of gratitude, that he just tremendously admired, and the tight family bond that Waite had with his mom and dad, which maybe had been ridiculed earlier on. He now saw it as a source of strength. So there they are, Ruth, Gehrig, Hoyt. I like to call them the power trio, maybe not exactly Crosby, Stills, and Nash, or even Harpo, Chico, Groucho, but I would posit that the Yankees would not have been as successful without Waite, Hoyt. So you had Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, and Murderers Row, who were hitting those bombs and scoring runs, but you also had Waite, Hoyt holding down the runs on the other side. In fact, he had a reputation for low-scoring games, particularly in the postseason. His postseason earned run average was 1.89, which is very low, meaning that he allowed very few runs to score. I'll just say as a quick aside, in the 1921 World Series, this is really unbelievable. Waite pitched 3 complete games in the 1921 World Series, 27 innings, did not allow an earned run. Now, the other team, the Giants, scored run on errors that were not Waite's fault, and the Yankees managed to lose that World Series. But really an incredible accomplishment that the only other pitcher who has done something, or who accomplished something similar, was the great Christy Mathewson. So while Waite was on the Yankees, he also got married. That's his first wife, Dorothy, and their daughter, that's Susie. They had a daughter and a son. The son was Harry. So there was this sort of background of domestic bliss. It was really an illusion. Waite and his wife bought a house in Larchmont. They planted a garden. They got a car. They seemed to, on the surface, being, living sort of in domestic bliss, but it really was not the case. Waite was involved in indulging in all the things that all the other Yankee players did, which was really obviously not good for his marriage to Helen. He also became a mortician. He had the nickname the Merry Mortician for a time. He hated the nickname. I couldn't find a picture of him as mortician. I picked this one because it looked kind of ghostly and appropriate to the subject matter. But he got into this because he was looking toward a vocation after his baseball days were over, and his wife's father was in the mortuary business. It didn't work out. He didn't stick with it. The pay wasn't really great, and there were other reasons why he didn't pursue it. But there is a funny story attached to it, which is that Waite had a body that he had to deliver from Larchmont to Brooklyn. He also had to pitch a game at Yankee Stadium that day. So he loads the body into basically the trunk of a car. I mean, it was kind of a makeshift hearse, and he loads some ice in there. He drives the car, parks it at Yankee Stadium, pitches the game, and then carries on, delivers the body to its final resting place in Brooklyn. He was also involved in vaudeville. Many baseball players were at that time. Waite perhaps more to a greater extent than many others. There he is getting his makeup put on. As I mentioned earlier, his dad was in vaudeville, and he actually had involved Waite at a very early age. While he was working on his pitching, he was also working on his singing and dancing skills. So it was really a natural for Waite to do that in the off season. The thing about it is that it paid 3 times as much as he was earning with the Yankees, if you can believe it. Now, the Yankees didn't like that Waite was playing vaudeville because it was bad for his conditioning. He would come to spring training out of shape, but the money was irresistible. And so Waite continued on with it, even though it wasn't really great for his baseball playing. I think his attitude to the Yankees was, if you don't want me to play vaudeville, then pay me more money, which they didn't. So he kept playing vaudeville. But it put him in touch with people like Mae West. He would swap dirty jokes with Mae West. She would use them in her act. He hung out with the Marx Brothers, Jimmy Durante, you name it. And then there was this guy whom you probably recognize. That's Al Capone. A great story that goes with this as well. The Yankees were playing in Chicago, and Wade and Joe Dugan and a couple other teammates went to a speakeasy where Capone was the owner. And Joe Dugan was kind of a wisecracker, and he bellied up to the bar and said to the bartender, "Any chance we could meet the big guy?" And the bartender said, "Are you serious?" And Dugan said, "Why, sure." So the next thing they know, there's this armored vehicle parked outside. They get in, they're whisked across Chicago to Capone's hotel room. They go right up in a freight elevator. They're told to keep their hands out of their pockets, and there are armed guards at every floor. So they get to Capone's floor, walk down a long hallway into this cavernous room, and sitting there is Al Capone behind this huge desk. And behind Capone on the wall, there's a picture of George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and Al Capone. And so Dugan, being Dugan, steps up to Capone, extends his hand and says, "3 great men, George, Abe, and Al." And Capone just thought that was hilarious. He ordered in a case of champagne, and they spent the afternoon drinking champagne with Al Capone, which I don't know much about what they talked about, but it's really was there anything that Waite didn't get involved with? It seems like he just kind of did it all. It's almost, his life almost has kind of a Zelig-like quality, or Forrest Gump, where he just ran into all these people and had sort of extremely memorable experiences with them and great stories to tell. But all good things come to an end eventually, and there's Waite with his friend, mentor, and really, to the extent he had a father figure other than his own father, was Miller Huggins, who was the great manager of the Yankees, who had great faith in Waite and his abilities, and felt strongly that if Waite would just behave, he could win 25 games a year. That never quite happened, but Waite was the winningest pitcher in all of baseball in 1927, won 22 games, lowest ERA, was the pitcher on that 27 Yankees, also the 28 Yankees World Series win, where Waite pitched won two of the 4 games that swept that series. But Huggins died suddenly, 1929. And that was the end of Waite's career with the Yankees for all intents and purposes. He hung on for a little while longer, but he had lost his mentor, and Huggins was replaced by Bob Shockey, who had been another pitcher on the Yankees team. And he and Waite didn't get along. And at the very first opportunity, Bob Shockey traded Waite to the Detroit Tigers. And he never really regained his former glory there. This is Dorothy Hoyt. His marriage also fell apart at the time. And this is really where his drinking kicked in. I think he was always drinking while he was on the Yankees. He claimed he never pitched while he was under the influence, but it was definitely a presence. But this seemed to have been kind of a turning point where he was maybe indulging a bit more than he should. So Miller Huggins dies, Waite gets traded away, his marriage dissolves. He doesn't see his wife, his ex-wife, Dorothy, or his 2 kids by that first marriage for 40 years, which is pretty unbelievable. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So the balance of his his baseball career after the Yankees was pretty checkered. So as I said, he was traded to the Detroit Tigers, was there for maybe a season, then to the Philadelphia Athletics under Connie Mack, where he really only pitched for a half a season, including the World Series. And then Connie Mack, for all intents and purposes, just cut him loose. He went to the Brooklyn Dodgers, to the Giants, and then he landed with the Pittsburgh Pirates, where he was for about 7 seasons. He didn't necessarily pitch very well while he was on the Pirates. He pitched well enough to keep his position there. I think he enjoyed his time. I think you can take one look at the expression on his face and kind of surmise that maybe he wasn't all that happy during that period. He also met his second wife, and this is Chris's mom. That's Ellen Burbank Hoyt, who was very wealthy and a socialite. Her father was a shipping mogul and very wealthy. And of course, her family didn't approve of her marrying a baseball player at all. Even though this was the Yankees and they were famous, it still wasn't seen by many people as a respectable career or anything that he ought to be doing. So he had one last hurrah with the Brooklyn Dodgers before he was let go for the last time in 1938. He finished out the season playing for a local semi-pro team, the Brooklyn Bushwicks, which played mostly against Negro League teams, which was, so he played with legends like Josh Gibson, which is, I think he really enjoyed that, but it confirmed for him that his time was up as a baseball pitcher. So he was looking toward what to do next. He had done some radio while he was with the Yankees. Some of the New York stations like to have Yankee players on the air to talk sports and other things. And so he quickly decided that was his best shot at becoming, basically developing a career. Post-baseball, he could maybe keep some connection to baseball, but also pursue what was maybe an extension of vaudeville. Vaudeville was over at that time, so he couldn't go back to that. But he had this entertainer's streak in him, so radio really appealed to him on that basis. So he took various jobs, mostly around New York. He really wanted to announce for the Yankees, obviously. The Yankees wouldn't even give him an audition, because at the time, it was believed that baseball players, this was just a prejudice, were too dumb and inarticulate to be game day announcers. Of course, that was not at all true of Waite, who was incredibly articulate. He had an amazing vocabulary. Some of the words he used, I had to go look up when I was working on the book. So it was really a good fit for him, but he was having a really hard time. He felt like a rookie all over again. And it was 3-4 years of kind of struggling before he finally got a call from his agent who said, would you be interested in taking a job in Cincinnati? And Waite had this young wife, and Chris had just been born, this young son, and was out of options. And so he took that opportunity and joined WKRC in Cincinnati and became the voice of the Cincinnati Reds. What he did was truly innovative at the time. Typically, when you would audition for a radio job like that, you'd put together a demo tape that was a recreation of a play-by-play of a game. But what Waite did instead, and this became his signature, was he just told stories. And the sponsors of the Reds, it wasn't the Reds directly, it was their sponsors who were doing the hiring, were really enchanted by that. And they saw an opportunity to do something different. So he was with the Reds for 24 years as the voice of the Reds, and his sponsor was the Burger Beer Company, which was interesting in itself because, as I alluded to a moment ago, Waite's drinking had become a problem to the point where he disappeared for 3 days over a weekend from his job. He was supposed to be on the air, but he was holed up at the Netherland Plaza Hotel in Cincinnati drinking. He finally wandered out to a seedy bar, took what turned out to be his last shot of whiskey, found a payphone and checked himself into a hospital and never drank another drop of alcohol. After that, he became a member of Alcoholics Anonymous and a sponsor of multiple people and a spokesperson for Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, you think about the incongruous of all this, that here he was, it came out in public that he was an alcoholic, but he was also promoting beer on the radio. And Waite thought for sure that he would be hired But that didn't happen. The Burger Beer Company rallied around him, as did the people of Cincinnati, which you think about the time, and this was about 1945, it seems incredibly progressive and remarkable that there was that turn of events. But that's what happened. Later in life, he became a painter. There really was nothing that this guy couldn't do. He was almost the kind of person that you hated, because whatever he tried, he was good at. He painted, I don't know how many paintings, but he sold around 30 or 40 of them. People commissioned him to paint. There's an example of one piece that he reproduced as a holiday card, as a Christmas card, which I posted on Facebook. By the way, there's a Waite Hoyt page on Facebook. It's just facebook.com/Schoolboy Hoyt, where I post a photo and some caption every day. When I posted this image of this work of art, it received thousands of likes, and this is from people who didn't even know who Waite Hoyt was. So there's clearly something about his style that resonated with, or continues to resonate with, a lot of people. So not much happened for Waite until 1969, when he was inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame. There he is with Stan Coveleski on the left there. That's Stan Musial standing next to him. Stan Coveleski in the lower left, and Roy Campanella, who at that time was in a wheelchair. And this moment for Waite, which was really an honor. So it was 1969. He hadn't played baseball since 1938. He was elected by the Veterans Committee, not necessarily because of his prowess on the field, which he certainly had heroics on the field, but because of what was felt to be his contribution to the game of baseball. And I think that's a culmination of everything that Waite involved himself in as a baseball player, from the minor leagues to his time with the Yankees to his time as the announcer of the Reds. But there was one really poignant moment during that weekend when Waite was inducted in the Hall of Fame. It came while he was thanking everybody for the honor of being inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. And I had a copy of that speech. And the amazing thing is that, after he thanked everybody and said all the usual things, he paused and he said, "But I could have been a journalist instead." And when I read that, my jaw just dropped. I thought, what journalist wouldn't have killed to have had Waite Hoyt's career in baseball? But again, that goes to sort of this central conflict in his life, where he never really felt comfortable that he had done the right thing by becoming, as I said, just the greatest baseball pitcher on what's largely considered to be the greatest baseball team of all time. So here you have this sort of multi-layered story of Waite Hoyt, beginning with him as a minor league player. There he is. He was with the Memphis Chickasaws, or the Chicks, as they call him, very young. That's actually a very rare photo of him. There he is as the superstar of the Yankees. That was a whole other layer of his story. The vaudeville singer, he's pictured here with a guy named J. Fred Coots. You've probably never heard of him. You probably know his best known song, which was Santa Claus is Coming to Town. But people were paying money to see the star of the Yankees sing and dance. And he was playing halls. He was selling out vaudeville halls from coast to coast. So there's that whole era, that whole aspect, that whole layer of his story, which really captures not just him as a baseball player, but sort of the era in which he lived. Then there's the artist, the painter, the intellectual Waite Hoyt, the voice of the Reds. There he is, kind of late in life, and where he is still so fondly remembered. It was one of the biggest surprises to me in writing this book, or since it's been published, the extent to which his fan base has come alive in Cincinnati. Most of the people who remember them, anybody who remembers him had to have been very young at that time, maybe less than 10 years old, as opposed to the Yankees, where it's very unlikely there's anybody still alive who ever saw him play on the Yankees or even with any team in baseball. But there's still a lot of people who have very fond memories of listening to Waite Hoyt on the radio. And then there's really the foundational layer, I think, which is Waite Hoyt as a man. And I think this is what he really wanted to get at with this book. And I think this is maybe why he never finished his memoir. He couldn't quite pull it all together. And, here's this guy, as I said, was good at everything he tried except really for one thing, and that was being a father. for all intents and purposes, I hate to say it so bluntly, but he abandoned his first family. His relationship was maybe not the best with even Chris. Here they are. That's actually young Chris Hoyt, probably 30 something. On the left, his wife at the time, Judy. That's Ellen Hoyt, Waite's wife, and Chip Hoyt, who is Chris's son. He's actually Christopher Waite Hoyt Jr. So there was this whole dynamic and this element, which, I talk about the conflict, or Waite wanting this book to be about a man in conflict with himself. I've only come to appreciate in the last couple of weeks, literally, that conflict may have had more to do with his personal life than anything else. And this all came to a head in a very good way last week, where I was honored to give a talk about the book. Actually, it was a conversation with the curator at the National Baseball Hall of Fame. And since the book came out, it's had this really seismic effect on the Hoyt family, where there are all these different factions within the family who didn't know each other, hadn't met, or maybe were kind of slightly suspicious of each other, but they decided to take the occasion of the book being featured at the Baseball Hall of Fame to have a family reunion. I'm happy to talk more about that when we get to the Q&A, which I think it's time for the Q&A. Thank you very much, and I welcome your questions.
Well, thank you so much, Tim, for all of those fabulous pictures and stories. Those are fantastic. I have a question that I usually kick off our questions with. Again, anyone in the audience that's watching live, if you have a question or comment, please do post it in the comments box, and we will get to it in just a moment. We have a couple now. But to start, Tim,
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about some of the sources that you used for the book? At the museum, of course, for all of our exhibits, we do extensive research. And I know this has been a multi-year process in the creation of this book. So we'd be curious to know more about the materials that you used to bring this story to life.
Sure. Great question. Most of the material came from those 8 boxes. And that was really, again, the beauty and the gift that I was able to do that, in particular, those transcripts, which I had mentioned earlier. When I found the transcripts, which actually I don't think I explained why they were in there, but Waite and his niece, Chris's cousin, her name is Ellen Frell, had in mind to write a biography of Waite, and had conducted, I don't know how many hours of interviews with him, and all of that was transcribed. And until I got to those transcripts, I wasn't really sure what, if anything, I had, because the contents of the box, while it was organized, was still somewhat chaotic. It was just a mix of a whole bunch of different things: memoir attempts, letters, notes, diaries, newspaper clippings, photographs, cassette recordings. I mean, you name it, it was all in there. And so my first task really was to take that transcript and retranscribe it, re-enter it, so that I could internalize it, and then use that as the foundation for the book. Now, of course, there were some holes in there as well. And fortunately, I was able to fill those holes, in particular his post-baseball period, the period after he left baseball and became a radio announcer. I didn't have much material on that. I think that Ellen and Waite had not quite gotten to that part of his life. But he had donated materials to the Cincinnati Historical Society. So I contacted them, and lo and behold, they had content that I was able to use to fill in many of those blanks. And it just all fit together beautifully into a complete narrative arc. I had to be very careful to make sure that everything I was using actually were things that Waite had written, because he had worked with a number of ghostwriters when he was trying to put together a memoir. There was definitely a big difference between the way those folks wrote and the way Waite did. In fact, I found something in his notes to the effect of, there seems to be a difference between when I say something and the way it, you sort of render it on the page. And so I wanted to just be extra certain that none of that slipped in here. And it was possible for me, in part because I had those transcripts, but also because I knew Chris so well. And one of the real kicks of this whole project was how much Chris and Waite sounded alike. And I could hear Chris's voice patterns in what Waite had written, and it made it easy for me to or relatively easy to figure out what was truly his and what wasn't. And then beyond that, it was just a matter of fact checking.
Right. Well, it's amazing that Waite started this story. Did you say 5 times that he had started this memoir and kind of given up on it?
Yeah, it was a number of attempts. He was very frustrated with it. There was one version that was complete, and he decided to pull it. It was ready to be published, and he halted the publication. And the reason that he gave was that he didn't want his book just to be a series of amusing anecdotes, which is what that was. It was just a little too happy-go-lucky for him, and it didn't really capture who he was as a man. And so that was the greatest challenge for me, was trying to sort all that out. Over and over again, I found in his notes that this is the story of a man in conflict with himself, which is very generic. And so I was constantly on the lookout for various examples of how that manifested itself, which it did in a number of minor ways. But the big ones, as I said, was just this big split, which I think originated with his mother and father, between a career in baseball and maybe a more respectable career in business, or as he said at the Baseball Hall of Fame, in journalism.
Right. So one of our audience members does ask, any other Hoyt baseball players or sports players?
No, I mean, related to him, no. I mean, have been players who have maybe attempted but never gotten anywhere near his level. So no, there haven't been. And it was actually a question that I asked Chris when he told me that his dad was this famous pitcher. I said, well, how come you didn't pursue baseball? And he said, well, because I inherited my mom's pitching arm.
One of our other audience members asks, how do you think Waite would react to your book? Do you think he would be pleased that this had been published? Do you think he would have been excited that his words were finally getting out there?
Well, I certainly like to think so. I have no way of knowing. I wonder about that sometimes myself. I'm sure he would have had, some ideas to contribute if we had had that opportunity. I can tell you a little story that you may find weird. I was in Cincinnati about a month and a half ago to promote the book. I spoke at the Reds Hall of Fame. I did a TV interview. I did a signing at Barnes & Noble. During a little bit of downtime, I went and I visited Waite at his gravesite, where he's buried at the Spring Grove Cemetery in Cincinnati. The next morning, I woke up in my hotel room, which happened to be the Netherland Plaza Hotel, the very same hotel that I mentioned earlier, where Waite had sort of had his lost weekend, if you will. And I looked down at my ankle, and there was a penny stuck to it, which I'm thinking, how the heck did a penny get stuck to my ankle? I don't care. I don't know about you, but I pay with my phone all the time. I don't even carry pocket change, and I was not in my street clothes or anything like that, but somehow a penny became adhered to my ankle. I immediately thought this had something to do, or might have something mystical to do with Waite. That was my first instinct. I couldn't read the date on the coin, but I took a picture of it, blew it up, and the date was 1984, which is the year that Waite died. Not only that, it was also the year that I met Chris. So I like to think, I enjoy thinking. I don't believe, I don't disbelieve, but I like to think that was a message of some sort of endorsement.
Amazing. Oh my gosh, that's fantastic. What a strange and mysterious sign from Waite.
Yeah, a penny from heaven, right?
One of our other audience members asks, as a radio presenter, do you feel a connection with Waite? Have his presentations inspired any of your broadcast work?
Well, I'm not a broadcaster anymore. That was something I did very early in my career. But yeah, absolutely. It also informed, it's an interesting question, because I think it has a lot to do with why I saw the book the way that I did, having spent so much time on the radio. And radio is basically about writing in your head. You don't have a script, but anytime I would open the microphone, I would always think very carefully about what I would say, so that I would say it as succinctly and clearly as possible. At the same time, keeping a very conversational kind of tone. And I feel that style carried over for me when I went into publishing, particularly with the internet. And in the magazine business, I did countless interviews with chief marketing officers of big companies. And this was very much my approach, where I would record them and then I would basically use what they said as the foundation for the stories, and much as I did with Waite, let them speak for themselves. So there's definitely a connection, I feel, but in that sense. I'm not broadcasting now, so I can't say that he's had an influence on me after the fact, although I am doing a lot of interviews like this. And I was honored, actually, somebody said to me that I was a great storyteller. And I felt like, well, it's because Waite was a great storyteller. I'm just kind of the reteller of those stories.
Passing along his stories.
That's right. Yeah, which is really a joy. The most fun I've ever had with any project ever was writing this book. It was just sheer fun. And, to your question about whether Waite would enjoy reading it, I had so much fun writing it. I like to think that he would have fun reading it. I feel the same way about other people. That was kind of my test. It's always my test of whether a piece of writing is good or not, is whether people would enjoy reading it. And my theory is that if I had a good time writing it, people will have a good time reading it. Mm-hmm. And I think it is a fun read.
Very enjoyable read. I will say, everybody, if you have not read Schoolboy, please do. The last question we have for you, Tid, and if anyone does have any other further questions, please do put them in now. Thank you to everyone who did submit a question. If you have any after the fact, we will do our best. Maybe I'll send some on to Tim, see if we can get some answers. But we do have one more for you, Tim. Right. I know that you were, as you just mentioned, just in Cooperstown, New York, location of the National Baseball Hall of Fame, of course, to attend this family reunion. And I wondered if you would tell us just a little bit more about this event and some of your takeaways from it.
Well, it really was an astonishing turn of events. Nothing that I ever expected. As I sort of mentioned during the presentation, that, I started out, I was writing a book about a baseball player, and that was it. And then this other sort of dimension of that era in history of the Roaring '20s, that took on sort of an additional layer with vaudeville and Al Capone and all the rest of it. And then his radio career obviously was another layer. But it wasn't until all this transpired with his family that I realized how important to Waite, and obviously to his family, that their story be told. And what had happened when, word kind of trickled out from my friend Chris to other family members that this book was in the works, there were some family members who were suspicious of it. They were very wary, I wouldn't say hostile, but just uneasy that there was going to be this new memoir of Waite Hoyt and no mention of his first family, of his first wife, Dorothy, and the two kids, Harry and Susie, who now have had children and there are grandchildren. And that's completely understandable how they would feel that way. But it all turned around when they actually read the book and they saw that Waite, far from hiding anything about that part of his life, he wrote more about his first wife than his second wife. I actually had trouble finding material on Ellen relative to the amount that he wrote about or talked about his first wife, Dorothy, which I think kind of goes to his sense of unease about the whole situation. So it really, I just find it remarkable that this has turned out to be really the pivot point of the book. So there was this family reunion with 24 members of the Hoyt family there, celebrating that they were back together. And these riffs had developed in various ways, and I don't want to get into any of them because some of them can be rather personal. But it's just, I don't know. You start on a project like this, a book, and you think it's just a book, and who would think that a book could actually bring together a family like that? And the fact that that's happened is so satisfying, so gratifying to me that if the book did nothing else, if it did that, it would have been enough. I mean, the book is doing really well, much better than any of the experts predicted that it would. But this sort of unintended side effect of the Hoyt family reunion just makes it so special.
Well, what a legacy for the book as well. What a fabulous outcome to have the two halves of the family come together and reconnect.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, everyone, I do want to remind you, I have the cover of the book here, of course, Schoolboy, The Untold Journey of a Yankees Hero. So please do pick it up and read it if you have not already. It is a fantastic read. Tim, I want to thank you, of course, for joining us here today. Thank you so much. And I wondered if you had anything that you would like to tell anybody. I know that there's the Facebook group and the website, of course, for the book.
Yeah, so there's a website, schoolboyhoyt.com, which has a lot of great photographs of Waite. There's an excerpt from the book there. I also have a blog where I write certain, little essays about the book. They're not directly taken from the book. It's more my processing of the book or analysis or just sort of take of certain aspects of the book in a variety of ways. The most fun, though, is the Facebook page, which I started last fall, I think October. And all I'm doing with that is every day I post a photo of some kind, either of Waite or people from his life. And some of the quotes that I use that I associate with the pictures are from the book, others are not. In some cases, I link that photo and caption to something that happened that day in history where that works. But it's grown tremendously. I've been surprised, almost like 5,000 followers just in a short space of time, which is another thing I just never would have predicted. And a lot of folks said, Waite Hoyt, interesting choice. Why Waite Hoyt? Of course, as you know now, there was a good reason why it was Waite Hoyt, but there was no demand for a Waite Hoyt memoir at this point. But the
People
more
didn't know what they wanted.
the more they find out, the more interested they become. And that's been my personal experience with the book, with friends and family. As you mentioned before, I had written another book some years ago, which nobody cared about that book. It was a business book. But this one, where people not even interested in baseball, when I start talking about Waite and his story, they just are amazed and they want to know more.
There's so many access points, as you've talked about today, his career as a broadcaster or even his kind of dramatic past with vaudeville, and then his paintings as well. There's so many different ways that you could connect with his story. He
really was kind of a Renaissance man, I guess you'd say.
Well, again, thank you so much, Tim, for being with us. And thank you. All of you who have joined us today. Thank you all for being here, for supporting this program. And we hope to see you in the future at the museum and at all of our events and programs. So thank you so much.
Thank you.